Awesome.
All right, good morning everyone. My name's Karen Graham. I'm from North Queensland and I'd like to welcome you to today's Digitrek session. I'd first of all like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and welcome any First Nations people joining us today. I will now hand over to Miranda Mears of the Australian Impact Group to take you through your session. Thanks, Miranda.
Thanks, Karen, and welcome everybody, those that are online at the moment and those that are going to be recording this, because we've got this wonderful capability now of being able to get access to information at the tip of our fingertips. So just to give you a little bit of a context of what we're going to be doing today, we're looking at cybersecurity fundamentals. My name is Miranda Mears and my background is 25 years in business, IT and cybersecurity. I actually ran a cybersecurity company for about 13 years, way before cybersecurity got the interest and acknowledgement of its importance in the organisation as it has today. So I'm really super excited to see where cybersecurity as a profession and as a discipline is going. And I am really proud to be here on part of Digitrek to talk to you all about cybersecurity. So today what we're going to be looking at is a few different things, and I'm sure that you can appreciate that the amount of scope of things that can be done within cybersecurity is huge. So we're not going to be able to cover everything within an hour, but what I really would like to be able to do with you is give you my scope and perspective on what is cybersecurity, how it has enabled us, myself and my organisations, to be able to strategically assess organisations from a cybersecurity perspective, and how you can assess your cybersecurity position and plan for a new digital transformation. Of course, we are also, as part of the Digitrek roadshow, really honing in on trying to elevate digital careers and what that looks like. And cybersecurity is an amazing opportunity. So if for anyone is interested in actually looking in cybersecurity careers and what that looks like, please take note during the session. And if you've got any questions, please feel free to ask. So the one thing that I think is really, really interesting about cybersecurity, and it's one of those things that I think anything that digital technologies has in it is a little bit of mystique. So most people are thinking that, you know, cybersecurity, what does it actually mean to me? So I'd like to tell you a little bit of a story about the way that I consider cybersecurity as an organisation function. So long before many of us could probably remember, workplace health and safety was this wackadoo idea that, you know, some people might do, but it really wasn't considered fundamental and core to what an organisation does. You would have gentlemen like these guys on the top of the Sydney Harbour Bridge going and doing crazy things and really putting themselves and their organisation at risk, purely because they didn't know any better and they didn't think that it was a critical aspect of all of their business. So cybersecurity is a little bit of the same thing. And I like to position it as it is like workplace health and safety, because it really does touch on every single aspect of your business, right through from you know, bringing on your first trainee through to being able to protect the health and safety of your staff. And it's only increasingly getting more so as we move towards greater digital transformation in organisations across the value chain. So I'd just like you to consider this picture as we're going through, and when we say whose responsibility is it, as with workplace health and safety, it's everybody's responsibility. So the universal truth about business and risk, and this I like to put this into the context of cybersecurity, because it's no different to anything else that we look at around risk management for organisations. So the universal truth of business's risk is that you really need to know what you have first and foremost before you can try and protect it. So there's that uncovering of what the organisation has, and that's where a lot of organisations fall down in their cybersecurity, because they actually don't understand what it is that they have and how important it is to their organisation. Secondly, you have to understand the threats and vulnerabilities that are applicable to those assets, and how what is the likelihood of them being compromised and the cost of that compromise to the business. And then you need to protect it appropriately. Similarly, like we would do if we're protecting our offices from a cyclone or from flood, as we've all seen, there's only so much we can do with the resources that we have. So we really have to be cognizant of being able to make sure that we know what we have, what they're at risk at, and how we can protect them appropriately. And that's the fundamental aspect of risk management. So for those of you that have a risk management hat on or have been in workplace health and safety, for example, you might find that this is pretty straightforward because we're not doing anything different. And I think that's one of the common misconceptions around cybersecurity, is it's this really tough and confusing thing that is beyond the capabilities of most people. And that's simply not true. Fundamentally, it's a universal truth of business. We need to manage our risk, and cybersecurity is now one of those risks. So before we go and have a look at cybersecurity, I'd like to demystify some of the things that a lot of people think about cybersecurity. So most people think that cybersecurity is some hacker or geek sitting in a dark corner, punching away on a computer screen. And while that is absolutely true, it's a lot more than that. It's around, as we talked about previously, being able to understand and protect everything that's going on in your business. And as that progresses into further digital transformations and expanding supply chains and into integrated communications and cloud technology, that's getting more and more business as usual. So the other part where, from a historical perspective, cybersecurity is challenged is society thinks it's the responsibility of the IT person. So the IT person is the one that's going to fix up all the problems, and that is simply absolutely not true. Fundamentally, yes, you need to have technical people that understand the technical solutions and how to implement them in certain aspects. But fundamentally, who is responsible is actually everybody. It's the business owner, it's your board of directors. And then it filters down to every single person who has a responsibility to make sure that the controls that a person or an organization has defined as appropriate to make sure that those assets that are protected are actually doing the right thing. And that's sometimes where the effectiveness of our cybersecurity controls does fall down, is the fact that we're not actually considering cybersecurity in the same way that we would workplace health and safety. If you look at an organization and what they're doing with their workplace health and safety, typically the owner, the board, the senior managers all have an accountability and activities responsible for cybersecurity, for that workplace health and safety. But when it comes to cybersecurity, it's often thought of as a last minute inclusion, or they might think that they're actually, going to do one little part of cybersecurity and think they're protected, and it just doesn't happen that way. So we need to be making the conversation around cybersecurity a different one, where we are actually going, this is everybody's responsibility, and we need to make sure it's part of every aspect of our business. So this is a massive slide about the age of cybersecurity. I'm not going to go into it in too much depth, but I just wanted to touch on a few aspects around why we need to be really upping our ante in terms of our business risk management around cybersecurity. So we've all experienced some significant uphaul around COVID-19 and changes to the way that we've done business. That's been a great boon for cyber criminals and attacks. It's up 600% since COVID-19. Australia itself is actually rated 4th as a top threat globally. So as a country, we're of real interest to a lot of significant players in terms of, the risk management. Cybersecurity is the 4th globally across all of organisations as importance for their risk management and the threat to their businesses. Australia itself is ranked 3rd globally. So what does that mean to our organisations? Firstly, that this is going to keep increasing. We're going to have more and more attacks. They're going to be increasingly focusing on Australia, and predominantly because they know that they're going to get results from that, and that the types of attacks are going to be more significant. So when we are looking at who is the target, a lot of organisations that I speak to, particularly small to medium businesses, think that they're probably going to go under the radar of the hackers and the attackers. And that's not true either. 42% of businesses that are attacked in Australia are small to medium businesses, compared to 20% of government and infrastructure, and large businesses of 33%. So what we're looking at here is a lot of businesses. And if you think of small to medium businesses as being 98% of the employers and a significant proportion of our gross domestic product, that's a huge risk to our organisation. And that's why you've seen Scott Morrison and the federal government put so much money into cybersecurity. So what are we looking at in terms of, well, what does that mean to my business? Fundamentally, 60% of small businesses that actually do have an attack will go out of business after that attack. And that's because we don't have enough consideration in a lot of organisations around actually being able to identify business continuity plans. So similar, like if you have a cyclone, you know that if you have a cyclone and you lose power, you're going to do step A, step B, step 3, C in recovering from that incident. But when it comes to cybersecurity, we're not often doing that. And often as well, we don't actually know that we've actually been attacked until it's far too late. So when we are looking at the types of attacks that we are facing as organisations, there's some really fundamental things that are being attacked all the time. So ransomware, web application attacks, and brute force attacks are probably the biggest attacks that your organisation is going to face. So if we're looking at, bang for buck, return on investment, there's some really simple things that we can do to actually protect ourselves from that. 41% of cyber claims on insurance are due to ransomware. And let me tell you that the insurance companies and the regulators are watching this particularly, and they're going to be hardening down on what they accept as claimable incidences. So from a global impact, what we're looking at is a huge impact across all of our sectors, so particularly around the areas of SME, but also healthcare, transportation, mining and manufacturing really need to up their ante when it comes to their digital protections. When we're talking about the cost of cybercrime and why we need to focus on it, if we look at where the projections are intended to be by 2025, we're actually looking at about $10.5 trillion a year. That's massive. And more than the global drug trade. So in terms of what is cybersecurity, is it just these hackers that are coming in and exploiting our business? It's not at all. 44% of fraud actually comes from internal actors. So disgruntled employees that are just had some errors and how they've been operating, or perhaps it just comes down to really poor culture. So from a risk perspective, what we're actually looking at when we're talking about cybersecurity is any risk associated with the financial loss, disruption to the operations, or damage to an organisation's reputation, resulting from a negative impact event that's impacting the organisation's information and information systems. So fundamentally, what we're looking at is the information and the information systems are what is impacted, but the damage to the organisation and the risk associated with that is financial loss, business continuity, and reputational damage. So really significant challenges that organisations do really need to take seriously, particularly as I mentioned, we are a third global target and it's the fourth top rated threat in globally. But there is some positives out of it. So cybersecurity is one of the fastest growing industries in the world, and the opportunities for people to get into digital careers in cybersecurity is phenomenal. We don't have enough cybersecurity professionals in Australia or globally actually, and we don't have any hope of actually being able to recruit as many people as we need in the short term, unless we're actually looking at individuals that might be in IT or in workplace health and safety or other areas, looking at cybersecurity as a potential opportunity for them to transition to a new career pathway. So amazing opportunities there. Similarly, there's some really great economic opportunities for cybersecurity. So while all of this bad stuff is happening, organisations are obviously becoming more attentive as to who they're going to do business with. And those businesses that they are going to do business with are ones that they can trust. And the ones that they can trust are those ones that they can be able to demonstrate that they are really have solid practices in place to protect their information security. So that's what we're going to have a look at now is, well, what can we do to ensure that we are making the most of those opportunities and protecting ourselves from those risks? Firstly, careers in cybers. And I wanted to bring this to the forefront before we actually go into, well, how do I protect my business? Because there might be just something that just tweaks your interest as we're going through. As I mentioned, the roles in cybersecurity are diverse and rewarding. They span a lot of different areas, including technical, policy, risk management, marketing, engagement, and more. Importantly, an IT background is not a prerequisite for a career in cybersecurity. In fact, in my experience from running a cybersecurity company, while there's definitely those areas or niche areas of technical expertise, which is important, actually what's more important is your personal attributes. So are you a continuous learner? Cybersecurity is evolving so quickly that you're never going to be able to just do a qualification in its own right, which is going to teach you everything that you need to do. So that curiosity and continuous learning is really important. Perception. So cyber security is super interesting and creative. So if you can look for flaws and look for challenges and look for problems, it's a really great opportunity. Being able to be perceptive and inquisitive is also very, very important, because a lot of it does actually come down to problem solving and being able to see things that are not as quite as they should be. Being a great communicator is also amazing, as so is creativity. But there are a lot of different careers which have different requirements in all of these different areas. You might not be a great communicator, and that's totally fine. When I worked at Securus Global, we used to hire a lot of penetration testers, which is your ethical hackers, that definitely were not great communicators, but they were amazing technically and perceptively and inquisitive. So there's a role for everybody. My role is actually in risk and governance. So my abilities is to actually be able to traverse that boundaries between what is technical and what is how that applies to organisations across the value chain. So there is a lot of different opportunities, and I highly recommend, if you are interested in looking for careers in cybersecurity, that you check out the NICE Workforce Framework, which you can find on the AusCyber website. So yeah, I hope that there's something in here that intrigues you to get into a career in cyber, because we need more, particularly in North Queensland. So just a few little articles that I captured from not very far in a long period of time. They're to demonstrate that we are really in a war every single day, and businesses are being attacked. In Townsville, in North Queensland, we've had significant numbers of businesses actually be attacked by a lot of the different methods of attack that we'll be talking about today. So it is in our backyard, and definitely because we're in regional North Queensland doesn't mean that we're not a target. So where are the targets coming from? Or threat sources coming from? Any risk associated with our disruption provides an opportunity for someone to get a benefit from us. So we're looking at a whole range of different threat sources, from internal, human error, malicious actors, inappropriate processes, policies and systems, but also our leadership and culture. And we're also looking at our external threat sources, so criminals, nation states, corporate spies, disgruntled insiders, individual hackers, supply chains, political groups, systems, and natural disasters. So I'm pretty sure that you've probably seen a lot in the news of late around that, in terms of, you know, certain countries potentially taking a little bit more interest in our systems and our supply chains as what we would like them to, but we're also looking at things like natural disasters, for example. There was an organisation in Brisbane towards the 2016 floods that lost their whole backup system because of floods. Now, that actually required their business to they required their business to be online for 24/7, according to a contract that they had set up with a national health organisation, which meant that they breached their requirements. So that gave them a lot of fines and significant impact to their business operations. So when we're looking at back to our risk management, we have to think about all of these different threat sources and how they potentially could be interacting with our assets so that we can make sure that we've got the right policies, procedures and controls in place. So some of the common malicious threats include malware, identity theft, phishing, ransomware, spam, websites, supply chains, our IoT devices, so anyone that's got like little sensors or drones or anything like that, potentially a threat, our physical security, networks, insiders and outsiders. So there's quite a lot of common malicious threats. And just due to time, we're not going to be able to go through them all, but I do want to touch on a few of them and go into a bit more depth, because it does allow us to be able to cover a lot of the different controls that we need, but also just as a high level, so we know where those major threat points are. But when you are creating your controls to protect your organisation and look at the different areas that you might want to get into, making sure that you have a broad spectrum around all of these different threats is really important. So let's have a look at ransomware. So ransomware is one of the biggest threats to small to medium businesses at the moment. It's essentially malicious software that encrypts or steals your and locks your system, preventing you to have access to the data. So they're withholding for threat or extortion. But generally, it's caused by clicking on malicious links and spam emails, visiting malicious or compromised websites, or by networks being exploited and viruses being downloaded. So as I mentioned before, third as a global target is Australia, and 41% of all insurance claims. Some really, really basic fundamental things that you could be doing to protect your organisation here is ensuring that you're backing up and that you're running virus software and you have your firewalls and you are using multi-factor authentication. We'll go into more of these controls a little bit later on, but it's really interesting that in a lot of respects, a lot of these really major threats to our organisation can be addressed by some really basic fundamental policies and procedures that are not rocket science and do not require you to be a technical genius. So phishing, another one which unfortunately is far too common because we don't do what we're supposed to do. You've all probably heard from enough people that you shouldn't click on links and diverge sensitive information. But we do it all the time. So phishing relies on impersonation tactics to fool target into divulging sensitive data, transferring funds, or opening the door to future attacks. Maybe you've seen some of the emails from your bank, or someone purporting to be your bank, asking you to, verify your password by clicking on this link, or to provide your information to someone. And spear phishing is taking that to a new level for organisations. So spear phishing focuses on specific targets and involves prior research, social media and corporate sites to obtain useful information through attackers to find out who is most likely to have the keys to the kingdom. And if you have a look at this little email that I've got over here, this is an email that one of my colleagues received from another one of my colleagues, so she thought. By all intents, it looks very legitimate. It has her email address, it uses his correct name, and asks her to perform some action in order to do something. And generally, it will have some sort of level of urgency or demand that makes people assume that what they're doing is legitimate. So these are getting increasingly dangerous, and we'll look at some controls, but essentially what we're wanting to be doing here is always being vigilant. And that's some of the challenges around humans, is that sometimes they're ourselves are our own worst enemies. AI and deepfakes are a new challenge for organisations. They're becoming, these phishing attacks are becoming increasingly more sophisticated with artificial intelligence and deepfakes. I'm not going to play it today because it's a little bit not appropriate for a TAFE course, but I highly recommend you Google deepfakes, and you'll get some really funny and interesting videos that quite scarily show you how realistic these deepfakes can mimic biometric data and trick yourself or systems on face, voice, or gait recognition. And there has been some incidences of late where organisations have been compromised by deepfakes trying to exploit their information. One organisation in the UK, the CEO received a voice message from their group CEO in another area of Europe, and it was so accurate that he did what they asked, which was transfer $300,000 into this system. Again, they used urgency and that deep knowledge of what the organisation's policies and procedures were to be able to trick the organisation into believing that what they actually were doing was a legitimate request by a person. And that is coming across in a lot of different areas. So we've had in Australia and in Queensland a lot of phone calls, spam phone calls from mobile numbers coming through. While I wouldn't suggest that every single one of them is potentially trying to capture your biometric data, including your voice, it's definitely a threat. And it's definitely a risk that we need to consider when we're looking at our organisation systems and policies and procedures to provide people with instruction and information on what to do when they get those scenarios, and how to just protect the organisation themselves from falling victim to these attacks. Ultimately, it's going to be very, very hard for any organisation to keep up technically with what a lot of these scamming large cyber criminal gangs are doing. So we have to protect ourselves from a multiple of different levels, but most importantly, from just vigilance. Invoice redirection fraud is another one that we're seeing a lot of and has actually impacted quite a few businesses in Townsville and North Queensland that I'm aware of. So invoice redirection fraud is a man-in-the-middle attack, which enables a hacker to intercept conversations between a payer and a payee to redirect payments to a different account. So essentially, the hacker intercepts the communication, such as an invoice, and changes payment details in an otherwise legitimate invoice. So one of the instances that I've seen in North Queensland is a supplier, tradesman that was working for a larger organisation, who rang up their contractor and said, "Oh, you haven't paid me. What's going on?" And his the business owner's wife was like, "What are you talking about? We've paid. We paid last week. We're really embarrassed. What's happened?" The business had received an invoice that looked very, very similar to them, but they had actually had compromised bank account details. So unfortunately, that is probably something that the bank is not going to recover for them, because it does not necessarily caused by the bank, but it definitely, from a cyber insurance perspective, they might get some funds back. But even then, we're getting some real pushback from banks and from insurance providers on what organisations are going to be able to receive back from their in terms of compensation. So we have to be vigilant. A fraud like this could easily be be prevented by some very basic fundamental controls around policy and procedure. If you have suppliers, make sure you have a master supplier list with the bank account details where you've received the bank account details on a letterhead. It's been validated by authorised delegates from the organisation. And if there are any changes to the bank account details, pick up the phone and confirm before any payment is made. And that will definitely help you in your business prevent the possibility of invoice redirection fraud. The brute force attacks are another major impact to organisations. So 3.6 million brute force attacks launched every hour around the world. It involves submitting many passwords or paraphrases with the hope of eventually guessing a combination correctly. So obviously, you have probably all heard that you need to use strong passwords, and definitely a lot of organisations are enforcing stronger passwords. You'll see that passwords are currently sort of getting to being about 16 characters long in some respects. They require a combination of capitals, non-capitals, numerics, sometimes non-alphanumeric characters such as exclamation marks. It really depends on the system. However, even those are typically not strong enough to be able to protect from a brute force attack. It doesn't take that long when you've got masses of supercomputers trying to brute force a password. It also doesn't help if you're reusing the same username and password for lots of accounts, particularly where you're reusing the same password for your sensitive systems, such as your banking passwords, using the same passwords as you do on your social media or any of the online apps that you might subscribe to. So from a policy and procedures perspective, but also from making sure that just your own vigilance is being upheld, use super strong passwords. My banking passwords are typically around 34 to 60 characters long. They're paraphrases, so I don't forget them, which is something that passwords we can often do. And it just ensures that we're going to make it a little bit harder for them to eventually guess a combination correctly. We also want to be looking at multi-factor authentication. And I know a lot of people tend to not try and use them because they are an extra step, they take a little bit longer. It really does protect you if they can't actually get access to your systems. I was in Paris one day and I lost my phone. I don't usually use my phone to do banking, but because I was overseas, I had been. They had access to my phone, but because I had multi-factor authentication using a physical token on my banking apps and some of my other sensitive data, I felt comfortable enough that I was able to ring fence the threat to my own security and protect myself. So just consider those when you're thinking about, from an organisational perspective, what are you going to do? Are you going to ensure that all of your staff use multi-factor authentication or have really strong passwords? And how are you going to make sure that they actually follow that? So IoT and smart devices is an increasing threat to organisations. So these are everything's connected these days. We've got smart devices, we've got the Internet of Things, of everything is connected to the internet and it's each other. And whilst that is an amazing opportunity for our businesses to implement streamline efficiencies into our organisation, it does present a challenge to our organisations. So 84% of security professionals believe that these IoT devices are more vulnerable to computers and that they're going to make our networking security really risky. So if you are using IoT and smart devices in your organization, you really should be looking at how you can apply different controls to making sure that they're locked down. Typically, these devices, when you pull them out of the box, have a really easy, common password that isn't changed, and every single device that potentially is on the same network or the same type of device has the same password, which makes it a really useful opportunity for malware and cyber criminals to get access to launch against a whole heap of different devices. So just be really careful with your IoT devices. This might be one area where policy and procedures is not going to be adequately enough, and you might need to employ your managed IT provider or, you know, a digital professional to actually ensure that they are hardened and have good, robust defense and depth controls to make sure that they're protected. The great thing about, though, with cybersecurity is you don't need to be an expert in everything. And I think that's a really important thing to remember as a business owner. Don't be confused or scared off using these devices, because they are actually very valuable and useful in including into your business operations. And as we progress with digital transformation, that's only going to become more so. So what we want to be able to do is just be able to identify the risk, understand how important the assets are to us, and ensure that we're implementing those controls appropriately. And if that means bringing in professionals to do certain elements of it, then that's probably the best thing that you can do, rather than just hope that you're off the radar of somebody, because you won't be. So supply chains are also our biggest risk. So 3 of the biggest supply chain risks to companies include data leaks, supply chain breaches, and malware attacks. So essentially what happens here is where we have organizations that are working together and they have a flow of data. They can also flow exploits and breaches that can compromise the organizations. So this is really important from an organizational risk management perspective to manage your digital trust, not just with your customers or your consumers, but also with your organizations that you're working with. So typically in North Queensland as well, what you'll find is there's a lot of organizations that are working with you know, a bigger player, maybe into defense, maybe into council or something like that. And what you're doing with your organization matters to these people and matters to these organizations. So you want to be able to make sure that from a trust perspective, you can validate to these vendors and the organizations that what you're doing is robust and in line with good security practices and principles. And increasingly, that's going to be a condition of market participation, but it's also an opportunity for market differentiation. So if you're an organisation that wants to be able to grow and expand and look at larger contracts, such as defence or council type contracts, being able to demonstrate how you protect your data, but also by virtue of protecting your data, them, could be a strategic opportunity for you. So that's a really important thing to consider in your cybersecurity controls and your risk management, but also as a more high-level strategy that you might need to be discussing with your board and your leadership. There's a lot of different frameworks that we can work on, and which we'll go through a little bit later on, but the big part about supply chains and being able to implement supply chain security effectively is that you need to know what your supply chain looks like. So that involves really digging down and understanding how data flows and where it flows and how they could potentially be used. So we're going to go into a little bit of deeper analysis in being able to understand our context in a little while. But this isn't just an IT person sitting in a room. This is where it gets really, really important that cybersecurity is everybody's business, because even the littlest chink in this flow can cause significant challenges and undo all the good work that you may have done in other areas of the organisation. Malicious insider is always my favorite and always the one that is not really considered when we're looking at cybersecurity to that greatest depth. So a malicious insider is someone in the business or either current or former, contractors, trusted business partners who misuses their authorized access to gain critical assets in a manner that negatively affects the organization. So some of the areas where malicious insiders often operate are around IT sabotage. They've been fired or they're not happy with the way that the organization is working. So they do something to blow up a system or impact the confidentiality or availability of those systems to the organization. Data theft is another really huge problem and is increasingly more so. There's significant commercial opportunities for data theft and value that we sometimes don't think about, and it's really important that we ensure that we're protecting our most important asset, which is our information and our competitive intelligence. Insider fraud, also obviously one of the bigger ones around how businesses can be compromised. Typically, it's about breaching the financials or using the systems and information that they have to their own benefit to the detriment of the organisation themselves. Unfortunately, is far more common than what we see, and I don't think I've seen a week in a paper that doesn't have something about someone's accountant, someone's bookkeeper, someone's IT manager is being charged with fraud. And unfortunately, in most instances, the perpetrators are trusted and in a position of authority to be able to perpetrate and conceal the crime. And in some instances, the value of that could be into the hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars, even in a small business over a period of time. There's a couple of incidences in town. I won't go into the anecdotes because they are, unfortunately, Townsville and North Queensland is a small places, but it's just something to be really mindful of. And those that are usually the ones that are compromised by malicious insiders are those that either really do trust the people that they're working with, small and medium-sized organisations where it's really difficult to be able to segregate those duties to stop someone from being able to perpetrate and conceal a crime, but also those ones that don't necessarily consider it to be as big a risk as perhaps some of the external compromises. So they don't implement procedures and controls, particularly around exiting employees and what that looks like to ensure that the data is protected and locked down after that person has left, or in many instances before that person has left the organisation. Data and identity theft is another area where we're really focusing on as part of our organisational security. If we think about what it is we're protecting, the data is the kingdom and the users are the key to the kingdom. So being able to steal digital information, to compromise privacy or obtain personal or confidential information is quite lucrative. And unfortunately, we're in a position currently with the way that we're doing with digital transformation that everybody is online all the time and using all sorts of different devices and systems that they may knowingly or unknowingly put their company information at risk. So when we're looking at how we can protect our identity theft, again, there's a lot of different technical controls that you can put in place, and we'll go through some of those. But a lot of it does come down to vigilance around what you're prepared to put online, what you're sharing, and how you are making sure that you are protecting that information with the level of integrity that it deserves. So I don't know how many times I see every single day on Facebook those quizzes where they ask you what your color of your first car was, what your best friend in primary school was. They're not asking those questions because they care. They're asking those because they're wanting to capture data from you. Interesting one just this week. Not sure if you saw it, but there was a wonderful ingenious app which turned a profile picture into a beautiful painting that then when you clicked on it, gave access to your systems and your data that conveniently gave it to Russian hackers that were able to steal a number of identities and use those. And we're looking at the compromise being not just on that they're using the information, but they're using those identities to be able to perpetrate further crimes such as wage theft and banking theft, and being able to take out credit and in the business, the victim's name. So it really is something that as organisations we want to be focusing on, but also ourselves as well for our own personal protection. When we're looking at compromises, we need to really look at our web applications. Through COVID, a lot of people have gone online, and that has meant that we've set up websites, we've gotten new Facebook accounts, we might have online shops, and they can be either purchased off the shelf or created in-house. However, not all web applications, although they might look the same, act the same. So 75% of cyber attacks are done at the web application level because they're easy to access, they're easy to compromise if we don't have the correct protections in place. Why have I highlighted this as an area that we want to be focusing on? Because it is an area that we can do something about quite simply by making sure that we're using the right vendors and we're using trusted providers in trusted locations so that we can actually protect our businesses a little bit more than just selecting someone randomly to do a website because it's $500 cheaper than another business. So this is where investment into really understanding how you're using technology works is important. Many times, particularly for those of us that are in IT, it does our head in when businesses are selecting technology or selecting solutions that they haven't actually gone and really thoroughly investigated and done their due diligence before they've selected it, because the purchasing decision is so easy when all you have to do is click on an buy now and you've got a website within 20 minutes. So just something to be mindful of. Also to be mindful, data breach disclosure is something that organisations are going to have to start to think about when they're starting to manage their reputation. So all Australian businesses with an annual turnover of 3 million are required to report data breaches. It's an essential requirement for those businesses. However, our consumers, regardless on how big we are getting more mature and more aware of the importance of maintaining their data privacy. So if you're not doing the right thing by them, they're probably not going to continue to work with you. So reputation management is a massive thing to consider when you're looking at cybersecurity. So context of what we're looking at. So we talked previously about risk management and knowing what it is that you're wanting to protect and how that flows through the organisation and what you need to be able to do. So essentially what you're looking to do in your organisation is get a collection or a consolidated data map of what it is that you own, whether it's systems, physical information and people, and then how they are used and consumed throughout your value chain. So how, where, who, where, why, and what are important to be able to understand from a value chain perspective how each of those organisational assets are used. Then what you're wanting to do is look at the CIA triad. So the CIA triad is the cornerstone of all cybersecurity. It's what we're wanting to do really when we're looking at cybersecurity. We're protecting the confidentiality, the integrity and the availability of those assets so that we can maintain our trust profile for them and have access to use them when we need to access them. So this whole context process can take a little bit of a while. It's probably one of the missteps of organisations implementing cybersecurity appropriately. A lot of organisations go, oh, I'm going to implement Essential 8, I'm going to do this, and they don't actually think about how it's actually going to apply to their business. So this is the first step in the process. A lot of different types of controls. I'm not going to go through them all today because they'll vary depending on the type of business you are. But essentially you have administrative controls, which are all about the people and the process, the system controls, which is how we lock down our systems, and our physical controls, and how we're going to protect the actual access into those physical assets. So we want to make sure that we're defense in depth, that we're not just doing one thing, we're doing multiple things. So we're protecting ourselves. We want to make sure that we're applying the principle of least privilege, that we don't give people access to things that they don't need to, because that actually reduces some of the risk. And that we're segregating duties so that we are able to ring fence areas of threat, particularly when it comes to internal fraud, to make sure that people cannot perpetrate and conceal crimes, or that we can actually identify them if things happen. And we want to make sure that we're implementing non-repudiation, which is about being able to ensure that we can actually determine who did what, which is also very important in fraud protection and protection against unauthorized access, to be able to know that the people that are actually accessing and doing things are the right people to do it, and we can't actually reduce the potential of, not being able to identify that person or who has actually done it, which is why we don't share logins and passwords. So there are a number of different types of controls that you can use for your organisation and helping you to be able to address these issues. The DSD Essential 8 is probably the most fundamentally used. Compliance with this framework is expected to become mandatory for many businesses and as a condition of market participation, but it's not necessarily the right one. So you do want to be able to make sure that when you are looking at your context, that you're picking the right framework. So on top of the Essential 8, I like to call it the AID, the Australian Impact Group Top 10. It's important to also consider your governance and your people, because they really are the cornerstone of making sure that your organisation's cybersecurity is in place. So we want to make sure that we've got really good governance, that it is a business issue that's considered to be everybody's business, where we have good cyber controls and that they're managed at a top layer by our leaders. That's really important to be able to make sure that we're leading from the top. We also want to make sure that we have a good cybersecurity framework in place. I mentioned about the Essential 8, but that might not necessarily be appropriate for your organisation. There's a whole heap of other frameworks, from international standards through to defence sector standards, which may be appropriate depending on what it is that you're wanting to achieve and who you're in what environment you're operating in. So typically, if you are not comfortable or familiar with any of these frameworks, a good step is actually getting someone in to help you be able to pick the right framework and the right governance model, because from that you'll ensure that you've got a much better success in actually implementing something that's not only appropriate, but might also save you money. Also, we need to think about people and culture. So we can have the best policies and procedure controls in the world. But if we don't have the right culture in place, you are not going to find that your cybersecurity is actually doing what it needs to do on an ongoing basis. So we need to have leaders that actually address cybersecurity and implement it through policies and procedures and provide the right training. But you also need to be able to establish a culture within your organisation that provides people within your organisation with a charter to challenge and disrupt those unconscious norms, to feel free and comfortable to speak out if they see something wrong or if they think that they can do something better. Unfortunately, this is something that many organisations struggle with, and it doesn't happen overnight. But we do need to make sure that when you're looking at your people and culture, that you do provide that opportunity to disrupt what we would otherwise normally do if there's an an indication that there might be something wrong, and being vigilant and aware that for what might look to be someone doing the wrong thing. You also need to be able to be your own detective and ensure that you are being mindful of all of those types of threats that I spoke about earlier, and be cautious. Is there authority? Does it look like it's official, or is there urgency? Is there emotion around it? Is there scarcity, and is it around current news stories or big events? Are all areas which you need to pause and be careful of before you make reactive responses, such as clicking on links or responding to emails asking for information. So just be your own detective around that as well. And again, that's something that if you are creating a culture to challenge, is important to let people know that it's okay to slow down if you're not sure that something is right. So we don't want to do these things as businesses, and also if you're looking at getting into cybersecurity. We've talked about this a little bit. We can't ignore cybersecurity. It is going to be, as it is now with workplace health and safety, an integral part of every part of our business. Don't overshare on, LinkedIn, Facebook, social media. Don't give too much away. Don't click on links or use over passwords. Don't overlook tokens and cut corners, because they really can save you at the end of the day. Don't play the Facebook viral games and quizzes and speak on random phone calls. Make sure that you're backing up your data and you're syncing it to a cloud that's secured, and download apps or download apps and systems that you've not looked into. Be your own detective. If you want to, there's a couple of different websites here that you can check my passwords and see if you've been pwned. Very useful to sort of see if you maybe have had a password that been compromised, and to think about checking your password strength. So if you are implying organisational policies and procedures around your people as well, this is also useful information to give them. So I spoke about the Essential 8 and the cyber controls that are there. The Essential 8 guide provides a checklist to guide your organisation in assessing and implementing and developing an appropriate maturity level. It is going to be dependent on your own organisation, the types of systems you use, the managed service providers that you use, and how they apply cybersecurity, which is why we don't say that there's a one size fits all. Every organisation is different. Yes, there's some very essential fundamental things that we can do, but you need to have it within the context of your own organisation and your own supply chain. Highly recommend you check out the Australian Cybersecurity Centre as well. It provides some great information at a level that's appropriate depending on the type of business you are, what type of organisations you are, and they can provide make sure you find trusted partners that can help you navigate and find the simplest solution for you. I've worked in large banks. I've worked with small businesses. They all have the same challenges, and that's being able to understand the context and put something in place that's appropriate for their organisation. Sometimes the simplest solution is the best one. It doesn't have to be necessarily overly complicated. So what's next for you? Look at where your organisation is. Make sure that you have your leaders on board, that you've got the most appropriate cybersecurity framework, that you gather and involve all of your stakeholders, take them on the journey. Make sure you're talking to the leaders and your key resources, and that you implement risk assessment and registers and policies and procedures that are appropriate to the organisation, and that everybody is on the same page in knowing what it is that they need to do. From then, you have a plan to implement and monitor. It might not happen overnight, but you definitely need to make a start, because this is not going to go away. And if you haven't got it already, make sure that you take out some cyber insurance. In the same way that you take out your public liability and your professional indemnity as part of your workplace health and safety, cyber insurance is a new norm. You'd be surprised at actually how quite cost effective it can be. So I think that is like right on the dot of when we need to finish. So thank you for today. And if you have any questions, welcome to ask them now, or alternatively at Miranda at AustralianImpactGroup.com, or through the lovely people at TAFE and Digitrek. Thank you.
Thank you, Miranda. That was so much information and made me realise, you know, things that we should be doing every day, and yeah, just slowing down, taking that time. And the deep fakes, that was really interesting too. I'll have to look into that more. But yeah, thank you for today. And yes, if there are any questions, please feel free to reach out through TAFE Queensland or through Miranda's email address as she provided there for you. But thank you for being part of today's session. And I will end the recording now.
Great, thank you.
Okay, but thanks. Yeah, there we go.